Alexander Hartwell spent Christmas Eve in the arms of his 25-year-old personal trainer, while his wife Diana fed their twin daughters alone in their sprawling estate overlooking Lake Tahoe. He thought he was finally free from the burden of family obligations, ready to start fresh with someone who worshipped his success without questioning his choices. What Alexander didn't know was that by the time he returned home on Christmas morning, his wife and 3-year-old twins would have vanished without a trace, taking with them a fortune that would leave him utterly destroyed for the rest of his life. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. The grandfather clock in the marble foyer of the Hartwell mansion chimed midnight as snow blanketed the pristine grounds of Emerald Ridge, the most exclusive gated community in northern Nevada. Inside the 20,000-square-foot Mediterranean villa, Diana Hartwell sat cross-legged on the imported Italian marble floor of the living room, her golden hair catching the light from the 15-foot Fraser, for she had decorated entirely by herself. At 29, Diana still possessed the radiant beauty that had first captivated Alexander 6 years ago when she was finishing her master's degree in psychology at Stanford. Tonight, she wore an emerald silk dress that cost more than most people's annual salaries, but the designer fabric couldn't hide the exhaustion in her sapphire eyes or the way her hands trembled slightly as she placed the last ornaments on the towering tree. The twins, Ruby and Rose, had finally drifted to sleep upstairs in their custom-designed princess suites, their auburn curls spread across Egyptian cotton pillowcases like liquid fire. At 3 years old, they were beginning to form complex thoughts and ask piercing questions. "Where's Papa?" had become Ruby's constant refrain, while Rose would wander through the mansion calling Dada, with increasing desperation that broke Diana's heart a little more each day. Hey Toxic Truths family! I am very thankful to Phyllis Ashby, who bought a membership for this channel. She is also the first member of this channel. I am very pleased with you. If you also want me to make a community post about you and talk about you using your name, please buy a membership and send me a super gift. This is very helpful to me in making interesting videos for you. Thank you. One more thing. Don't miss any of today's videos because today's videos are very interesting. Now continue the video. Diana's phone buzzed against the crystal coffee table, illuminating another text from her husband. Emergency board meeting. Won't make it tonight. Don't wait up. Merry Christmas. She stared at the message until her reflection appeared ghost-like in the darkened screen. This was the 6th emergency this month. The 9th missed dinner with the girls. The 20th excuse in what felt like an endless cascade of deception. Diana wasn't naive. She held a master's degree in psychology from one of the world's most prestigious universities, spoke 3 languages fluently, and could read people's motivations with surgical precision. She knew exactly what kind of emergency kept her husband away until sunrise, what kind of board meeting required him to shower and change clothes before returning home, leaving behind traces of unfamiliar perfume that clung to his expensive suits. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of pretending pressed against her chest like lead, making each breath a conscious effort. Diana walked through their home, a monument to Alexander's success as one of Silicon Valley's most ruthless venture capitalists. Original Picasso paintings adorned the hallways, a concert-grade Steinway dominated the music room, and Persian rugs worth more than luxury homes covered floors of hand-selected Carrara marble. Every surface gleamed with the attention of a full-time staff, every room arranged with the precision of interior designers who charged 6 figures for their vision. It was breathtaking. It was flawless. It was completely devoid of genuine love. In Alexander's study, Diana discovered the evidence she'd been subconsciously collecting for months. Credit card statements revealing charges at exclusive jewelry boutiques, intimate restaurants, and luxury hotels she'd never seen. Receipts hidden behind family photographs showed a pattern of deception that made her stomach clench with humiliation. A second phone tucked away in his mahogany desk drawer contained messages that painted a picture of betrayal so complete it took her breath away. "Can't wait to celebrate New Year's properly. Just us," read one text from someone named Scarlett. "Found the perfect penthouse. Move in ready January 2nd. Our new beginning, baby." Diana sank into Alexander's leather chair, The same chair where he'd once held the twins while reviewing investment portfolios, where he'd kissed her goodnight before late strategy sessions, where he'd apparently been orchestrating his escape from their family for months, possibly years. She lifted the silver-framed family photo from his desk, studying their faces from last Christmas. All four of them wearing coordinating winter white, genuine smiles radiating happiness and hope. Alexander's arm encircled her waist protectively while his free hand rested on Ruby's head, and Rose giggled in Diana's embrace. The man in that photograph bore no resemblance to the stranger who now returned home reeking of foreign perfume and couldn't maintain eye contact when his daughters raced to greet him. Diana's phone rang, startling her from her painful reflection. The caller ID displayed her sister's name, Dr. Rachel Kingston. "Merry Christmas, Dee." Rachel's voice carried warmth tinged with concern. "How are you holding up?" "He's not coming home," Diana whispered, her voice fracturing. "It's Christmas Eve and he's not coming home to his daughters." Rachel, a practicing psychiatrist, had learned the delicate art of knowing when to speak and when to simply listen. "What are you going to do?" Diana surveyed the study. Law degrees from Harvard, awards for Venture Capitalist of the Year, photographs of Alexander with senators and tech moguls. All of it built on his reputation as a man who valued family, who fought for innovation that would benefit future generations, who believed in the importance of children having stable, loving homes. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "The girls worship him when he's present. They light up every time his car pulls into the driveway. How do I shatter that innocence? How do I explain that their father chose someone else?" "You don't," Rachel said with gentle firmness. "You protect them. You determine what's genuinely best for your daughters, not what's most convenient for Alexander." After ending the call, Diana remained in the darkened study for another hour, listening to the house settle around her like a living thing holding its breath. Upstairs, the twins slept peacefully, trusting completely that Mama and Papa would keep them safe and cherished. Across the country, their father was likely toasting his anticipated freedom with a woman barely older than some of his investment advisees. And somewhere between those two realities, Diana felt herself dissolving and reforming into someone entirely new. Someone who wouldn't wait for rescue. Someone who would move heaven and earth to protect her children. Someone Alexander had never taken the time to truly understand, much to his future devastation. By the time the grandfather clock chimed 2 a.m., Diana had made 4 strategic phone calls, sent 3 encrypted emails, and accessed financial accounts Alexander didn't realize she knew existed. The woman who had decorated the Christmas tree in solitude was gone forever. In her place sat someone infinitely more dangerous, a mother with unlimited resources, nothing left to lose, and everything to protect. Outside, snow continued falling like nature's own curtain, covering the world in pristine white. Inside, Diana Hartwell began planning to disappear completely, taking with her secrets that would haunt Alexander for the remainder of his life. 3 months earlier, the Hartwell family had appeared to embody the American dream that graced the cover of Silicon Valley Living magazine. Alexander stood commanding and confident in his custom Armani suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile radiating the kind of magnetic charisma that had made him the youngest managing partner in the history of Pinnacle Ventures. At 34, he dominated boardrooms with calculated precision and built his empire on identifying revolutionary startups before they became household names. Diana stood beside him in the photograph, elegant in a navy Valentino dress, her golden hair swept into a sophisticated chignon. The magazine had described her as the perfect venture capitalist's wife, intelligent, gracious, and dedicated to philanthropic causes. What they failed to mention was how she'd abandoned her promising career as a child psychologist to support Alexander's relentless ambitions, or how she'd spent the last 3 years essentially raising their daughters single-handedly while he conquered Silicon Valley. Ruby and Rose, then barely 2 years old, had been dressed in matching white rompers, their chubby hands clasped together as they sat on their mother's lap. The photographer had captured them mid-giggle, their identical emerald eyes sparkling with the pure joy that only toddlers possessed. The article had been titled, "Power Couple, the Hartwells' Recipe for Having It All." But by September, Fractures had begun appearing in their perfect facade. Alexander's venture capital firm occupied 4 floors of a gleaming San Francisco high-rise, where he specialized in identifying and funding the next generation of tech unicorns. His corner office on the 52nd floor offered breathtaking views of the Golden Gate Bridge and housed a collection of first-edition business books that impressed potential investors during pitch meetings, though he'd never actually read most of them. It was there in early October that he'd first truly noticed Scarlett Davis. At 25, Scarlett was everything Diana had ceased to be in his eyes. Fresh out of UC Berkeley with her MBA, she approached her role as his executive assistant with wide-eyed enthusiasm and treated Alexander like he was the most brilliant business mind she'd ever encountered. She stayed late without complaint, anticipated his needs before he voiced them, and listened to his war stories from hostile takeovers with genuine fascination. More importantly, she didn't remind him about parent-teacher conferences or ask him to read bedtime stories or look at him with the quiet disappointment that had become Diana's default expression whenever he walked through their front door. The first time Alexander worked past midnight, Scarlett had ordered sushi from his favorite restaurant and insisted they eat together in his office while reviewing due diligence reports. She'd worn a black pencil skirt and cream silk blouse that struck the perfect balance between professional and alluring. When she'd leaned across his desk to highlight a discrepancy in a startup's financial projections, he'd caught the scent of her perfume, something light and intoxicating that reminded him of possibilities rather than responsibilities. "You're incredible at this," she'd said, gazing at him with unmasked admiration. "The way you spotted that hidden liability in their intellectual property portfolio, I never would have caught that." Alexander had felt something ignite in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years, the intoxicating rush of being seen as exceptional, of being appreciated rather than merely tolerated by someone whose life revolved around his schedule. By November, those late-night strategy sessions had become routine. Alexander found himself staying at the office later and later, manufacturing urgent deadlines that somehow always required Scarlett's assistance. She was brilliant, he rationalized. Sharp, dedicated, ambitious. It made perfect sense that she would become his go-to partner for complex deals. The fact that she also made him feel 25 instead of 34 was simply an unexpected bonus. Meanwhile, at the Emerald Ridge estate, Diana's days had settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly isolated despite their home's constant activity. She woke at 6 a.m. to prepare the twins' breakfast, supervised their morning playtime in the elaborate indoor playground Alexander had installed, took them for walks through the manicured neighborhood where other nannies pushed strollers worth more than most people's cars, and managed their afternoon naps with military precision. The evenings were the cruelest. Alexander's "I'll try to make it home for dinner" had evolved into "don't wait up, major deal closing," which had eventually become simply not calling at all. Diana would sit with Ruby and Rose at their antique mahogany dining table, cutting their food into tiny pieces while they chattered in their developing vocabulary, and feel loneliness settle around her like fog. "Papa work?" Ruby would ask, her small face scrunched in confusion as she pointed to his empty chair. "Yes, sweetheart," Diana would answer, forcing brightness into her voice while her heart fractured a little more. "Papa's helping companies grow big and strong." But late at night, after the twins were asleep and the mansion fell silent except for the hum of expensive appliances, Diana would find herself standing at their bedroom window, watching for headlights that arrived later and later, when they came at all. She'd attempted to bridge the growing chasm between them. In early November, she'd surprised Alexander at his office with homemade lunch and new photos of the twins mastering their first complete sentences. She discovered him hunched over his computer with Scarlett, their heads close together as they analyzed market projections, their conversation punctuated by her melodic laughter and his responding grin. "Diana!" Alexander had jumped up, his expression shifting from relaxed to guarded instantly. "What are you doing here?" "I brought lunch," she'd said, suddenly feeling foolish in her casual jeans and cashmere sweater among all the sharp suits and polished surfaces. "And I wanted to show you the videos of the girls saying full sentences now." Scarlett had excused herself with a professional smile, but not before Diana noticed how her hand lingered on Alexander's shoulder as she passed behind his chair, and how her fingers seemed to caress the expensive fabric of his jacket. They'd eaten the sandwiches in strained silence while Alexander scrolled through the videos on Diana's phone with distracted commentary. "That's wonderful, honey. Really amazing. I'm sorry I missed hearing it in person." But his eyes kept darting to his computer screen, to the stack of files Scarlett had left on his desk, to anywhere except the evidence of his daughter's developmental milestones that he was systematically missing while building someone else's dreams. By December, Alexander had stopped even pretending to try. He missed Ruby's third birthday celebration entirely, claiming a crisis with a portfolio company that couldn't wait. He forgot their wedding anniversary completely. When Diana gently reminded him during a rare shared dinner at home, he'd looked genuinely confused before covering his embarrassment with flowers delivered the next day. The flowers had arrived with a card. "Sorry I've been so busy. Love, A." Not Love, Alexander. Just A. As if even writing his full name for his wife had become too much effort. Diana had pressed one of the roses between the pages of her journal that night, watching the petals gradually darken as they dried. She'd written about the growing silence between them, about feeling like a stranger in her own life, about watching the man she'd loved transform into someone who viewed his family as obstacles to his next big success. But she'd also written about Ruby's first complete joke and Rose's newfound obsession with building impossible towers from blocks, about the way they both ran to her when thunder scared them or when they simply needed the comfort that only mothers could provide. Her daughters needed her to be strong. Whatever was happening to her marriage, whatever distance had grown between her and Alexander, Ruby and Rose deserved stability and unconditional love. So Diana had kept planning Christmas traditions, kept believing that somehow the magic of the season might remind Alexander of what he was systematically destroying. She had no idea that while she fought to save their family, the man she was fighting for had already made his choice, and it wasn't them. December 15th marked the beginning of Diana's awakening, though she wouldn't understand its full significance until much later. That morning began with Ruby's distinctive voice calling "Mama" through the baby monitor, followed immediately by Rose's infectious giggle echoing from their adjoining nursery. The twins had developed their own secret language over recent months, a fascinating blend of English words, gibberish, and gestures that only they seemed to decode perfectly. Alexander's side of their California king bed remained cold and undisturbed, the 1,500 thread count sheets pulled tight in a way that suggested he'd never returned home at all. His absence had become so routine that Diana no longer felt the sharp stab of disappointment, just a persistent ache that had taken permanent residence in her chest. She padded down the hallway to find both girls standing in their matching white cribs, arms extended toward her like tiny angels seeking salvation. Their auburn hair stuck up at impossible angles, defying gravity and expensive styling products alike. "Mama, up!" Ruby demanded with characteristic determination, while Rose bounced excitedly and pointed toward the floor-to-ceiling windows where fresh snow was beginning to dust the mountains beyond their estate. "Good morning, my beautiful angels," Diana whispered, lifting Ruby first and then Rose, inhaling their sweet morning fragrance of organic baby shampoo and pure innocence. These precious moments before the day became complicated with adult concerns and unspoken heartbreak, these were her sanctuary, her reason for continuing to fight. As she carried both toddlers downstairs for breakfast, Diana's phone buzzed with Alexander's latest fabrication, flying to Austin for investor meetings. Back Friday. Critical deal. She stared at the message while balancing a twin on each hip, her psychology training automatically analyzing the communication patterns. Today was Tuesday. Friday would mark 4 consecutive days away, and Diana knew with growing certainty that no investor meetings were scheduled in Austin. Alexander's calendar, which he'd always shared with her for family coordination purposes, showed absolutely no travel planned for the entire week. The realization struck her with crystalline clarity. He wasn't even bothering to create plausible lies anymore. The man who had once respected her intelligence enough to craft elaborate deceptions now treated her like she was too naive or too dependent to question his obvious falsehoods. While the twins enjoyed their breakfast of organic blueberries and steel-cut oats, Diana found herself studying their faces with newfound intensity. Ruby possessed Alexander's determined jawline and the way his eyebrows furrowed when he concentrated on complex problems. Rose had inherited his quick smile and the habit of tilting her head when something captured her curiosity. They were unmistakably his children, bearing his genetic signature in every expression and gesture. Yet he was systematically choosing to miss every precious moment of watching them develop into unique little individuals with their own personalities, preferences, and perspectives. After breakfast, she bundled the girls into their matching rose-colored snowsuits and drove to Silverstone Park, where other affluent mothers gathered with their children for what the local parenting magazines euphemistically called enriched socialization opportunities. The playground buzzed with activity. Expensive strollers arranged like luxury cars at a country club, designer diaper bags that cost more than many families' monthly grocery budgets, and mothers dressed in athleisure that carried price tags equivalent to small cars. "Diana," called Veronica Blackstone, pushing her 4-year-old son on the elaborate swing set. Veronica's husband controlled a major hedge fund, and she maintained the kind of effortless sophistication that required personal trainers, nutritionists, and weekly appointments with teams of beauty professionals. "How's Alexander? I saw him featured in TechCrunch last week. Something about that revolutionary artificial intelligence startup he funded." The article made it sound like he's positioning himself to become the next major player in AI investing. Diana felt heat rise in her cheeks, her stomach dropping with the familiar sensation of learning about her husband's professional triumphs from strangers rather than from Alexander himself. 6 months ago, he would have called her immediately after any significant press coverage, eager to share his excitement with a person who understood his ambitions better than anyone else in his world. "He's extremely busy," she managed, watching Ruby navigate the climbing structure with fierce determination that reminded Diana painfully of Alexander's own relentless drive. "You know how intense things become during the final quarter. Everyone wants their funding secured before the new fiscal year." Veronica nodded sympathetically, but her eyes held a sharpness that made Diana wonder exactly what details the TechCrunch article had revealed about Alexander's recent activities and professional associations. "Well, please give him my congratulations. James always says Alexander has the most sophisticated eye for revolutionary technology in the entire valley." During their walk home through the tree-lined streets of Emerald Ridge, Diana found herself truly observing their neighborhood for the first time in months. Every residence was a testament to extraordinary success, sprawling estates and contemporary mansions set back on perfectly manicured grounds, circular driveways filled with luxury vehicles, elaborate holiday decorations that had obviously been installed by professional design teams. But behind those gleaming facades, how many other wives were walking through their days feeling like unwelcome guests in their own lives? How many other marriages were quietly dissolving while children played innocently in rooms that cost more to furnish than most people's annual salaries? That afternoon, while the twins napped in their climate-controlled nursery, Diana did something she hadn't done since graduate school. She conducted serious research. Not recipes for organic baby food or articles about child development milestones or holiday entertainment ideas, but a deep investigation into her husband's recent professional activities and public appearances. The artificial intelligence startup Veronica had mentioned was indeed major news in Silicon Valley circles. Alexander had successfully led a $50 million Series B funding round for a company developing revolutionary machine learning algorithms that promised to transform healthcare diagnostics. The trade publications praised his visionary approach to emerging technologies and his ability to identify breakthrough innovations before they became obvious to competitors. But what captured Diana's attention was a smaller detail buried in one of the industry newsletter articles. The deal had required extensive collaboration with Austin-based technology specialists, including multiple extended strategy sessions throughout the fall semester. Austin, the same city Alexander claimed to be visiting this week for investor meetings. Diana stared at her laptop screen as pieces of a complex puzzle began forming a picture she desperately didn't want to see. She accessed their shared email account for travel receipts that automatically forwarded for tax documentation purposes. 4 trips to Austin in the past 2 months. Hotel reservations at the Four Seasons. Dinner charges at restaurants she recognized from food magazines. Intimate, expensive establishments where important business celebrations occurred or where powerful men took women they wanted to impress. Her hands trembled as she opened their joint credit card account online. The recent charges told a story that made her stomach clench with humiliation and rage. Jewelry boutiques specializing in custom pieces, luxury lingerie stores, exclusive florists, premium wine merchants, thousands of dollars in purchases for gifts that had never appeared in their home, presents that were apparently destined for someone else's appreciation. The twins stirred upstairs, their afternoon rest period ending precisely on schedule. As Diana climbed the stairs to retrieve them, she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, not just her heart breaking, but her entire sense of self transforming into something harder, more determined, and infinitely more dangerous than Alexander had ever bothered to recognize. Ruby and Rose were standing in their cribs again, hair mussed from sleep, reaching for her with complete trust and unconditional love that reminded Diana exactly what was worth fighting for in this world. As she lifted them both, Diana made a silent promise that would change everything. Whatever painful truth she was about to uncover, whatever devastating reality she was being forced to confront, these two perfect little humans would never doubt that they were loved, valued, and protected by someone who would move heaven and earth to ensure their happiness. That evening, while the twins played with their educational toys on the Persian rug, Diana opened her laptop again and began digging deeper into the scope of her husband's systematic deception, not yet realizing that she was about to discover betrayals that would make his extramarital affair seem almost insignificant by comparison. That evening, while the twins played with their blocks on the hand-woven Persian rug, Diana sat with her laptop feeling compelled to understand the full scope of Alexander's deception. What she discovered in the following hours would shatter every assumption she'd held about the man she'd married and the life they'd supposedly built together. Scarlett Davis wasn't merely Alexander's executive assistant. According to her LinkedIn profile, which Diana accessed through a professional networking search, Scarlett had been promoted to Strategic Partnership Coordinator 4 months ago, a position that didn't officially exist at Pinnacle Ventures but apparently came with a salary of $120,000 and unprecedented access to all of Alexander's high-profile investment deals. More disturbing were the social media breadcrumbs Scarlett had left across various platforms. Instagram photos showed her at exclusive tech conferences in cities Diana couldn't remember Alexander mentioning. LinkedIn updates revealed her attendance at investor galas wearing jewelry that looked suspiciously similar to pieces Diana had admired in Tiffany's windows but never received. Facebook check-ins placed her at Michelin-starred restaurants, Broadway premieres, and luxury weekend retreats at Napa Valley resorts, living the lifestyle of a successful venture capitalist's companion while Diana spent evenings alone with the twins. But the evidence that completely destroyed Diana's remaining illusions was buried in Scarlett's Instagram stories, archived from 8 weeks earlier. A photograph of a familiar view, the Golden Gate Bridge taken from the 52nd floor, clearly captured from inside Alexander's corner office. The caption read, "Working late again, but this view makes it worthwhile. Red heart, #blessed, #VClife, #grind never stops." The heart emoji in a photo taken from her husband's private office felt like a blade between Diana's ribs. Diana closed the laptop and surveyed their living room, family portraits on the marble mantel, the twins' toys scattered across furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries, the Christmas tree she'd decorated in solitude while harboring hope that the holiday spirit might somehow resurrect the man she'd fallen in love with. Everything beautiful, everything perfect, everything built on systematic lies. Her phone buzzed with another text from Alexander. "Dinner meeting running late. Don't wait up." But according to his digital calendar, which Diana could still access through their shared family account, no dinner meeting was scheduled for tonight. And according to Scarlett's most recent Instagram story, posted 30 minutes earlier, she was enjoying cocktails at an upscale Manhattan rooftop bar wearing a red dress Diana had never seen, her caption reading, "Celebrating amazing opportunities ahead." Clinking glasses, sparkles. For the first time in months, Diana didn't respond to Alexander's message. She didn't acknowledge his lie or ask when he'd be home or express disappointment about missing another family dinner. Instead, she picked up Ruby and Rose, carried them upstairs to their beds, and began mentally preparing for a future that no longer included the man who had systematically erased himself from their lives while maintaining the facade of a devoted family man. The woman Alexander had married, trusting, accommodating, willing to sacrifice her own career and dreams for his success, was disappearing with each revelation. In her place, someone far more formidable was emerging, a mother who had discovered that the man she'd loved was a carefully constructed illusion. Over the next week, Diana's investigation revealed layers of deception that made his affair seem almost trivial by comparison. Hidden credit cards funded not just his romantic escapades but an entirely parallel lifestyle. Expense accounts from Pinnacle Ventures showed charges for client entertainment that were actually romantic getaways with Scarlett. Most shocking of all, Diana discovered that Alexander had been using confidential information from investment due diligence to make personal stock trades, essentially committing securities fraud using insider knowledge gained through his professional position. The evidence was methodically documented in a leather portfolio Diana kept locked in her personal safe. Bank statements showing mysterious transfers. Screenshots of social media posts that established timelines of deception. Credit card receipts that painted a picture of systematic financial infidelity. Phone records that revealed the true scope of his lies. But Diana's psychology background had taught her that knowledge without strategy was powerless. She needed more than evidence. She needed a plan that would protect her daughters from the inevitable explosion when Alexander's house of cards finally collapsed. That's when she remembered her grandmother's stories. Evelyn Morrison had been a pioneering woman in the 1960s, building a successful import business when few women controlled their own companies. She'd always told Diana that the most dangerous opponents were those who underestimated women's intelligence and determination. "Let them think you're just a pretty face, darling," Evelyn used to say. "While they're admiring your smile, you can be analyzing their weaknesses." Diana had dismissed these stories as antiquated feminist rhetoric from a different era. Now she realized they were survival strategies that transcended generations. On December 22nd, Diana received a phone call that would change everything. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and utterly unexpected. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is attorney Patricia Wynne from Morrison & Associates in Boston. I've been trying to reach you regarding your grandmother's estate." Diana's heart stopped. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake. My grandmother Evelyn passed away 2 years ago, and her estate was settled." "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm referring to your paternal grandmother, Margaret Chambers. She passed away 18 months ago in Switzerland, and I understand there may have been family circumstances that prevented earlier contact." Margaret Chambers. Diana's father's mother, who had disappeared from their lives when Diana was 8 years old after a bitter family dispute that had never been fully explained to her. The grandmother whose Christmas cards had stopped arriving, whose birthday calls had ceased, whose very existence had become forbidden territory in the Morrison household. "That's impossible," Diana whispered. "We lost contact years ago. I assumed she'd forgotten about me entirely." "Mrs. Hartwell, your grandmother spent the last 20 years of her life trying to reconnect with your family. When your father passed away 3 years ago, Mrs. Chambers was devastated to learn she'd missed the opportunity for reconciliation. She hired private investigators to monitor your well-being and has been following your life from a distance, hoping for the right moment to re-establish contact." Diana sank onto the sofa, surrounded by Christmas preparations and the overwhelming scent of pine from the tree that now seemed to mock her with its festive optimism. "I don't understand. Why didn't she contact me directly?" "She wanted to respect your family's wishes regarding estrangement, even though it caused her tremendous pain. However, she made very specific provisions in her will that address your current circumstances." "What circumstances?" "Mrs. Hartwell, your grandmother was an extremely wealthy woman. Her estate was valued at approximately $45 million upon her death." The Christmas tree lights blurred in Diana's vision as the words sank in. $45 million. A fortune that could provide complete independence, that could ensure Ruby and Rose never had to depend on anyone who might view them as inconveniences rather than precious gifts. "But there's more," Patricia continued. "Mrs. Chambers was well-connected in international business circles. She was aware of your husband's professional reputation and his recent activities. She was quite concerned about your welfare and that of your children." Diana's blood turned to ice. Her grandmother had known about Alexander's affairs, his financial deceptions, his systematic abandonment of his family responsibilities. Mrs. Chambers left very specific instructions, Patricia said gently. The inheritance is yours unconditionally, but she also established resources for immediate protection and relocation if necessary. She created a comprehensive support system, legal representation, secure housing, financial protection, and personal security services specifically designed to help women in situations like yours. As Patricia explained the details of her grandmother's provisions, Diana realized that while she'd been collecting evidence and planning her next moves, someone who truly loved her had already prepared for every possible contingency. The woman Alexander had systematically underestimated was about to become the most dangerous opponent he'd ever faced. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. The conversation that followed Patricia Wynn's revelation lasted nearly 2 hours and fundamentally altered Diana's understanding of her own power and possibilities. As Patricia methodically outlined the resources her grandmother had assembled, Diana felt the last vestiges of the helpless wife she'd been dissolving into someone infinitely more formidable. Mrs. Chambers established what she called the Phoenix Protocol, Patricia explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to handling complex, high-stakes situations. She understood that women in your position often feel trapped not just by emotional manipulation, but by financial dependency and fear of losing their children. She designed a comprehensive system to eliminate every potential obstacle to your freedom. The Phoenix Protocol included liquid assets totaling $45 million, held in Swiss accounts that were completely invisible to U.S. financial tracking systems. More importantly, Margaret Chambers had purchased properties under corporate entities in 7 different countries, safe houses where Diana and the twins could establish new lives with complete anonymity if necessary. Your grandmother was particularly concerned about custody battles, Patricia continued. She established legal teams in multiple jurisdictions, specialists in international family law who understand how to protect children from parents who might use them as pawns in revenge scenarios. Diana's hands trembled as she processed the implications. Her grandmother hadn't just left her money, she constructed an entire escape infrastructure designed specifically for situations like the one Diana was facing. There's something else, Patricia said, her tone becoming even more serious. Mrs. Chambers had your husband investigated professionally. She was aware of his affair, but she was more concerned about the financial irregularities in his business practices. What kind of irregularities? Securities fraud, Mrs. Hartwell. Your husband has been using insider information from his investment portfolio to make personal trades. He's also been manipulating expense accounts and possibly embezzling funds from his own firm. Mrs. Chambers documented everything because she believed you might need leverage to protect yourself and your children. Diana felt the world tilting around her. Alexander wasn't just an unfaithful husband, he was a criminal whose illegal activities could destroy their family's reputation and financial security. More terrifyingly, his actions could potentially implicate her if prosecutors decided to investigate their joint finances. What am I supposed to do with this information? That's entirely your decision, Patricia replied. But Mrs. Chambers wanted you to understand that you have options most women in your situation never possess. You can disappear completely with your children and live comfortably anywhere in the world. Or you can stay and fight with resources that match or exceed anything your husband might bring to bear against you. After ending the call, Diana sat in Alexander's study, the same room where she discovered his betrayal, and felt power flowing through her veins like electricity. The helpless wife who had been planning to confront Alexander with tears and pleas for reconciliation was gone forever. In her place sat someone who controlled more liquid assets than Alexander's entire venture capital firm managed, someone with legal teams in multiple countries, someone with the means to disappear or to destroy him completely. But more importantly, she was someone who finally understood that her daughters deserved better than watching their father systematically prioritize his own desires over their well-being. That night, Diana made a series of phone calls that would set everything in motion. The first was to Patricia Wynn, authorizing the activation of the Phoenix Protocol. The second was to a private investigation firm Patricia recommended, requesting immediate surveillance of Alexander's activities. The third was to a digital security specialist who could ensure her communications remained completely private. By midnight, Diana had accessed her grandmother's Swiss accounts, confirmed the locations of safe houses, and established secure communication channels with legal teams who specialized in making wealthy, powerful men disappear from their families' lives permanently. December 23rd arrived with brutal clarity. Alexander's text came at 7:15 a.m., Austin meetings extended through Christmas Eve. Emergency investor crisis. We'll try to make it back for Christmas dinner. Diana stared at the message while the twins ate their breakfast, Ruby carefully feeding her stuffed elephant tiny pieces of organic pancakes while Rose discovered that dropping blueberries created fascinating patterns on their imported marble floors. But this time, instead of disappointment or anger, Diana felt only cold satisfaction. Alexander's lie about Austin meetings gave her exactly what she needed, confirmed evidence that he was prioritizing his affair over Christmas with his daughters. "Papa coming today?" Ruby asked, looking up with those devastating emerald eyes that mirrored Diana's own. "Papa has to work, sweetheart," Diana heard herself say, but this time the words carried a different weight. "But we're going to have the most magical Christmas, just the three of us." While the twins played in their elaborate playroom, Diana accessed Alexander's real location through the private investigators Patricia had connected her with. He wasn't in Austin. He was at a luxury resort in Big Sur with Scarlett, registered under a false name but easily identified through credit card tracking and facial recognition technology. The photographs the investigators sent were devastatingly clear. Alexander and Scarlett walking hand in hand on the beach, sharing intimate dinners by candlelight, lounging by a private pool while his daughters asked when Papa would be home. But Diana felt no heartbreak looking at these images. Instead, she felt the cold satisfaction of a chess player who had just realized her opponent had moved his king into checkmate position without understanding the danger he created for himself. That afternoon, Diana received a call that completed her transformation from victim to predator. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Agent Rebecca Torres from the Securities and Exchange Commission's Financial Crimes Division. We've been investigating irregularities in certain venture capital activities, and your husband's name has come up in our investigation. We'd like to schedule a confidential interview regarding any knowledge you might have about his business practices." Diana's psychology training kicked in immediately. The SEC didn't make casual phone calls to spouses unless they had substantial evidence of wrongdoing. Alexander's illegal activities were already on federal radar, which meant his carefully constructed world was about to collapse whether she acted or not. "Agent Torres, I think there are some things you should know about my husband's activities. But I'll need guarantees about my own immunity and protection for my children." "Mrs. Hartwell, if you can provide evidence of securities fraud or embezzlement, we can certainly discuss protection arrangements." "How much evidence are we talking about?" Diana looked around Alexander's study, thinking about the hidden credit cards, the insider trading records her grandmother's investigators had documented, the systematic theft from his own firm that Patricia's legal team had uncovered. "Agent Torres, I have enough evidence to destroy him completely. But I want to discuss terms that ensure my children and I are protected from any fallout." After scheduling a meeting with Agent Torres for December 26th, Diana made her final preparations for Christmas Eve. She packed 2 small bags for herself and the twins, containing only essentials and precious keepsakes that couldn't be replaced. Everything else, the designer clothes, expensive jewelry, luxury furnishings, belonged to a life that was ending. As evening approached and Alexander remained at his romantic retreat, Diana felt the last pieces of her old identity falling away. The woman who had spent months making excuses for her husband's behavior, who had convinced herself that love and patience could fix anything, who had been willing to sacrifice her own happiness to preserve their family, that woman no longer existed. In her place sat someone infinitely more dangerous, a mother with unlimited resources, federal protection, and the determination to ensure that her daughters would never again have to wonder why Papa chose someone else over them. Outside, snow began falling on Emerald Ridge, and Diana realized that Christmas morning would mark not just the end of their marriage, but the beginning of Alexander's complete destruction. The man who had underestimated her intelligence was about to discover that he'd been living with the most formidable opponent he'd ever face, and she was just getting started. Christmas Eve arrived with a kind of pristine winter morning that belonged on holiday greeting cards, but Diana felt none of the seasonal warmth as she executed the final phase of her carefully orchestrated plan. At 6 a.m., while Ruby and Rose slept peacefully in their nursery, she made a series of phone calls that would change their lives forever. The first call went to Patricia Wynne. "It's time to activate everything. I want to be gone by tonight." "Understood, Mrs. Hartwell. The jet is already fueled and standing by at San Francisco International's private terminal. Our team in Aspen has the safe house prepared, and Dr. Sarah Chen will meet you there to help the children adjust to their new environment." Diana's second call went to Agent Torres. "I'm ready to provide everything you need to prosecute my husband, but I need my children and myself relocated immediately for our protection." "Mrs. Hartwell, we've reviewed the evidence your attorney provided yesterday. This is one of the most comprehensive securities fraud cases we've seen. We can have you in witness protection within hours if necessary." The third call was the most emotionally difficult. Diana contacted Dr. Rachel Kingston, the child psychiatrist who would help Ruby and Rose understand their new reality without traumatizing them. "Diana, I've reviewed the psychological profiles you sent. Your daughters are resilient, but they'll need very careful support during this transition. The good news is that children their age adapt remarkably well to new environments when they feel safe and loved." As morning sunlight streamed through their mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows, Diana woke the twins and began the delicate process of preparing them for the biggest change of their young lives. She'd spent weeks planning exactly how to explain their departure without frightening them or poisoning their memories of Alexander entirely. "Girls, we're going on a special adventure today," she said as they ate breakfast in their matching high chairs. "We're going to visit the mountains where there's lots of snow, and maybe we'll see some deer and rabbits." Ruby, always the more perceptive twin, studied Diana's face with those piercing emerald eyes. "Papa coming on adventure?" Diana's heart clenched, but her voice remained steady. "Papa has to work, sweetheart, but we're going to have the most wonderful time, just the three of us." Rose clapped her hands excitedly. "Snow. Build snowman." "Yes, baby girl. We'll build the biggest snowman you've ever seen." While the twins played in their elaborate playroom for the final time, Diana completed her methodical destruction of Alexander's world. She accessed his hidden credit cards and documented every fraudulent charge. She copied files from his home computer that revealed the full scope of his insider trading activities. Most devastatingly, she gathered evidence of his systematic embezzlement from Pinnacle Ventures, money he'd stolen to fund his lavish lifestyle with Scarlett. At 11 a.m., Diana received confirmation that Alexander was still at the Big Sur resort, completely unaware that his life was disintegrating in real time. The private investigators reported that he and Scarlett had spent the morning on the resort's private beach, planning their New Year's Eve celebration in what Alexander believed would be his newly single lifestyle. Patricia Wynne called with final updates. "The Swiss accounts are fully activated under your new identity. The Aspen house is stocked with everything you and the children will need for several months. Most importantly, our legal team has prepared a comprehensive custody protection filing that will be submitted simultaneously in 3 different jurisdictions the moment your husband discovers you're gone." "What about the criminal charges?" "Agent Torres assures me that Alexander will be arrested within 48 hours of your departure. The evidence you've provided, combined with their ongoing investigation, gives them everything needed for multiple felony indictments. He'll be far too busy fighting federal charges to pursue any custody claims." As afternoon approached, Diana felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The frantic energy of the past weeks had been replaced by cold determination and absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. She spent the final hours creating memory boxes for Ruby and Rose, collections of photographs, videos, and keepsakes from their early childhood that would help them remember the good times with Alexander before his choices destroyed their family. Someday, when they were older, they would understand why Mama had needed to protect them from watching Papa choose someone else over their well-being. At 4 p.m., Diana dressed the twins in their warmest clothes and loaded their essential belongings into 2 small suitcases. Everything else, the designer nursery furniture, expensive toys, luxury items that had defined their privileged lifestyle, would remain behind as monuments to a life that had been built on systematic lies. "Are we going now, Mama?" Ruby asked as Diana buckled them into their car seats for what she knew would be their final ride in the Range Rover. "Yes, sweetheart. Our adventure is beginning." As they drove through the gates of Emerald Ridge for the last time, Diana felt no sadness or regret. She tried everything possible to save their marriage, to help Alexander remember that he had a family who loved him unconditionally. But the man who chose to spend Christmas Eve with his mistress while his daughters asked when Papa would come home had made his priorities devastatingly clear. The drive to San Francisco International took an hour through holiday traffic. Ruby and Rose dozed in their seats, lulled by the motion and completely trusting that Mama would keep them safe wherever they were going. At the private aviation terminal, a sleek Gulfstream G650 waited with engines running. The flight crew treated them like VIP passengers, which they essentially were, 3 refugees escaping from a man whose criminal activities were about to make national headlines. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Diana's phone buzzed with a final text from Alexander. "Sorry about Christmas dinner. We'll definitely make it home tomorrow morning. Love you." She deleted the message without responding and handed the phone to Patricia's associate, who would ensure it was destroyed completely. Alexander's attempts to contact his family would now go through lawyers who understood that some relationships, once shattered by betrayal and criminal behavior, could never be repaired. The plane lifted off as Christmas Eve officially became Christmas morning, carrying them west toward Colorado mountains and snow-covered safety. Below them, California disappeared into darkness, taking with it the life Diana had built on the assumption that love and loyalty were reciprocal commitments rather than one-sided sacrifices. Ruby stirred as they reached cruising altitude, looking out the window at stars visible above the cloud cover. "Mama, are we going to heaven?" Diana smiled genuinely for the first time in months, understanding that they were indeed ascending toward something infinitely better than the life they were leaving behind. "No, sweetheart. We're going somewhere even better, somewhere where little girls never have to wonder if they're loved enough." As the twins fell back asleep in the cabin's luxurious seats, Diana looked ahead toward their future with anticipation rather than fear. Alexander had unknowingly given her the greatest gift possible, the motivation to discover just how strong, resourceful, and dangerous she could become when her children's well-being was threatened. Tomorrow morning, he would wake up to discover that the helpless wife he'd taken for granted had disappeared, taking with her not only his daughters but also the evidence that would destroy everything he'd built through lies, theft, and systematic betrayal. The woman Alexander had underestimated was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. The first 72 hours after the FBI arrested Alexander Hartwell became a masterclass in how quickly a carefully constructed empire could disintegrate into rubble. By December 28, Alexander had experienced losses so catastrophic that his former colleagues would discuss his downfall in hushed tones for years to come, using his name as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked arrogance and criminal behavior. The arrest itself had been orchestrated with surgical precision. Agent Torres and her team had waited until Alexander returned from his romantic getaway with Scarlett, allowing him just enough time to discover Diana's letter and realize his family had vanished before federal agents appeared at his door with handcuffs and a warrant that detailed charges serious enough to result in decades in federal prison. Securities fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, conspiracy. The indictment read like a comprehensive guide to white-collar crime, each charge supported by evidence so meticulously documented that Alexander's high-priced defense attorney had recommended immediate plea negotiations rather than attempting to fight the overwhelming case against him. But the criminal charges were only the beginning of Alexander's destruction. Within hours of his arrest, Pinnacle Ventures had terminated his employment and frozen all assets connected to his partnership in the firm. The termination clause in his contract, which Alexander had arrogantly assumed would never be relevant, specified that any criminal activity would result in complete forfeiture of his equity stake, retirement benefits, and deferred compensation. 15 years of building his position at one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious firms disappeared with the stroke of a pen. The financial devastation extended far beyond his professional losses. The Securities and Exchange Commission had obtained emergency asset freezing orders that locked down every account, investment, and property connected to Alexander's illegal activities. His personal brokerage accounts, the Swiss accounts he'd thought were hidden, even his cryptocurrency wallets, all seized as evidence of his systematic theft from investors and his own firm. The Emerald Ridge Mansion, purchased primarily through funds that investigators could now trace to criminal sources, had been seized by federal marshals. Alexander's collection of vintage cars, his art portfolio, his membership in exclusive country clubs, everything that had defined his identity as a successful venture capitalist, was being liquidated to compensate his victims and satisfy federal restitution requirements. Most humiliatingly, Scarlett had abandoned him within hours of his arrest becoming public knowledge. The woman he'd sacrificed his family for had immediately hired her own attorney and was cooperating fully with federal investigators, providing evidence of Alexander's criminal activities in exchange for immunity from prosecution. The romantic relationship that had seemed worth destroying his marriage for had lasted exactly as long as Alexander's ability to provide her with luxury and financial security. Alexander's parents, prestigious academics from Boston who had spent decades building their own reputations in intellectual circles, had issued a public statement disowning their son and expressing support for his victims. His professional network, the venture capitalists, tech entrepreneurs, and political connections that had taken years to cultivate, had evaporated overnight as everyone associated with Alexander's criminal behavior faced their own potential scrutiny from federal investigators. By New Year's Eve, Alexander found himself in a federal detention facility awaiting trial, his bail denied due to flight risk and the international scope of his criminal activities. The man who had started Christmas Eve in a luxury resort with his mistress was spending the first day of the new year in an 8x10 cell, contemplating the reality that his daughters were celebrating their new life somewhere beyond his reach while he faced the possibility of spending the next 20 years in federal prison. The psychological devastation was perhaps even more crushing than the financial and legal consequences. Alexander had built his entire identity around being exceptional, more brilliant than his competitors, more successful than his peers, more deserving of privilege and admiration than ordinary people. The federal indictment had revealed him to be nothing more than a common criminal who had stolen from investors and betrayed everyone who had ever trusted him. The media coverage was particularly brutal. Silicon Valley Business Journal ran a cover story titled "The Fall of a Venture Capital Star," detailing how Alexander's criminal activities had potentially compromised dozens of investment deals and violated the trust of pension funds and institutional investors who had entrusted him with billions of dollars. TechCrunch published an investigative piece revealing the full scope of his insider trading scheme and its impact on market integrity in the technology sector. Most painfully, several business magazines ran follow-up stories about Diana's disappearance, portraying her as a heroic whistleblower who had risked everything to expose her husband's criminal enterprise and protect other potential victims. These articles praised her courage in gathering evidence against a dangerous white-collar criminal and emphasized how her cooperation with federal investigators had prevented even greater financial losses for innocent investors. Alexander's court-appointed attorney, his expensive private legal team had withdrawn when their retainer checks bounced due to frozen accounts, had delivered the devastating news that pleading guilty to multiple felony charges was his only realistic option. The evidence Diana had provided to federal investigators was so comprehensive and damaging that any trial would result in even harsher sentences and complete destruction of what little remained of his reputation. Mr. Hartwell, his attorney had explained during their meeting in the federal detention center, "Your wife documented everything. Every fraudulent trade, every embezzled dollar, every violation of securities law. The government doesn't need to prove their case, they just need to present your wife's evidence to a jury. You'll be convicted on every count." The plea negotiations offered Alexander a sentence of 12 to 15 years in federal prison in exchange for his cooperation in identifying other potential criminal activities in the venture capital industry. Even with full cooperation and acceptance of responsibility, he would be nearly 50 years old before he was eligible for release, assuming he survived prison and federal authorities determined he had provided complete and truthful testimony about his criminal associates. Perhaps most devastatingly, Alexander had learned through his attorney that Diana had successfully obtained permanent custody protection for Ruby and Rose through international legal channels. The girls were living under new identities in a country that didn't have extradition treaties with the United States for custody disputes, meaning that even if Alexander somehow avoided federal prison, he would never be able to locate his daughters or challenge Diana's custody arrangements. The children he had taken for granted, the family he had systematically betrayed, the wife he had underestimated, all were now permanently beyond his reach, protected by legal and financial resources that exceeded anything Alexander had ever controlled even at the peak of his criminal success. As Alexander sat in his federal detention cell on New Year's Day, listening to other inmates celebrate the beginning of what they hoped would be better years, he understood with crystalline clarity that his story was essentially over. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and controlled millions of dollars in investment capital was now a federal prisoner whose name would forever be associated with criminal betrayal and spectacular failure. The woman he had dismissed as a dependent housewife had systematically destroyed everything he had built through 15 years of criminal activity, and she had done it with a precision and thoroughness that professional investigators would study for years as an example of how to dismantle white-collar criminal enterprises. Diana had given him exactly what he thought he wanted: complete freedom from the responsibilities of family life. The fact that this freedom came in the form of a federal prison cell was a justice so perfect it seemed almost poetic. Outside the detention center, the world continued turning. Investors were beginning to recover their losses through federal restitution programs, and somewhere in a mountain safe house, two little girls were building snowmen with their mother, completely safe from the man whose choices had nearly destroyed their future. Alexander Hartwell had gotten everything he deserved, and he would spend the next decade contemplating exactly how much that was worth. 3 years later, Alexander Hartwell sat in the visiting room of Federal Correctional Institution Mendota, staring across a scratched plastic table at a woman he barely recognized as his former wife. Diana had changed in ways that went far beyond her shorter haircut and designer clothes replaced by simple, elegant attire. There was a confidence in her posture, a steel in her green eyes that spoke of someone who had not merely survived his betrayal but had transformed it into something approaching triumph. The meeting had been arranged through Patricia Wynne after months of legal negotiations. Alexander's cooperation with federal investigators had reduced his sentence to 8 years, and he had been transferred to a minimum security facility after demonstrating what prison officials called exceptional rehabilitation efforts. His participation in financial literacy programs for inmates, his volunteer work teaching other prisoners about the consequences of white-collar crime, and his complete acceptance of responsibility for his actions had earned him privileges that included supervised family visits. But Diana hadn't come to offer forgiveness or discuss reconciliation. She had come to deliver news that would fundamentally alter Alexander's understanding of his daughters' lives and his own potential future relationship with them. "Ruby and Rose are thriving," Diana began, her voice carrying none of the tentative uncertainty he remembered from their marriage. "They're healthy, happy, and completely secure in their new life." Alexander felt his chest tighten at the mention of his daughters. For 3 years, he had lived with only the sparse updates Patricia Wynne provided, brief confirmations that they were safe and well cared for, photographs taken from distances too great to show their faces clearly, and the constant ache of knowing he was missing every milestone of their childhood. "Do they remember me?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the institutional hum of fluorescent lights and distant conversations from other tables where inmates met with family members who still claimed them. Diana studied his face with the analytical precision of someone who had spent years learning to read deception and manipulation. "They remember you," she said carefully. "But they've also learned to understand why Papa couldn't be part of their lives anymore." The words hit Alexander like physical blows. His daughters, 5 years old now, had been told some version of the truth about why their father had disappeared from their world. He wondered how Diana had explained federal prison and criminal convictions to children who had once trusted him completely. "What did you tell them?" "Age-appropriate truth," Diana replied. "That Papa made very serious mistakes that hurt people, including our family. That sometimes when adults make bad choices, they have to face consequences that separate them from the people they love. That his absence wasn't their fault and that they are worthy of love and protection." Diana reached into her purse and withdrew a tablet, which she placed on the table between them. They wanted to record something for you. The screen showed a comfortable living room with mountain views visible through large windows. Ruby and Rose sat side by side on a cream-colored sofa, looking remarkably like miniature versions of Diana but with Alexander's distinctive jawline and the shape of his eyes. They appeared healthy, confident, and completely at ease in their environment. "Hi, Papa," Ruby said, looking directly at the camera with serious green eyes. "Mama says you're working very hard to become a better person. We hope you're being safe and eating good food." Rose, still the more playful of the twins, waved enthusiastically. "We learned to ski. And we have a dog named Ranger who knows how to catch snowballs. Mama says maybe someday when you're all better, you can come visit our mountain house." The video lasted only 2 minutes, but it contained glimpses of a life that seemed rich with joy and security. Both girls spoke clearly and confidently, showing none of the anxiety or trauma Alexander had feared his criminal behavior might have caused them. They talked about their school, their friends, their adventures exploring trails around their new home, and the sense of safety and love that apparently defined their daily existence. When the video ended, Alexander wiped tears from his cheeks with the back of his hand. "They seem incredibly happy." "They are," Diana confirmed. "We've built a good life together. A safe life where they never have to wonder if they're priorities or afterthoughts." Alexander absorbed the implicit criticism without defensiveness. 3 years of prison counseling, addiction recovery programs, he'd been forced to acknowledge his compulsive behavior patterns as addictive, and intensive therapy had given him tools to recognize his own responsibility for destroying their family. "Diana, I know I don't deserve forgiveness or second chances. But I want you to know that I understand what I did. Not just the criminal activity, but the systematic way I abandoned you and the girls emotionally long before I physically left. I chose my own ego and desires over the people who loved me unconditionally." Diana's expression softened slightly, though her posture remained guarded. "Alexander, I didn't come here to discuss our marriage or what might have been. I came because the girls have been asking questions about their father, and Dr. Chen believes they're emotionally ready for supervised contact if you're genuinely committed to being a positive presence in their lives." The possibility of seeing Ruby and Rose again, of being part of their lives in some capacity, felt almost too overwhelming to process. What would that look like? Video calls initially, supervised by child psychologists. If those go well over several months, perhaps supervised visits. But Alexander, Diana's voice became firm, carrying undertones of steel that reminded him exactly how formidable she had proven to be. This would be entirely about their well-being, not your redemption or comfort. You would have no parental authority, no decision-making power, no involvement in their education, healthcare, or major life choices. You would be a limited presence they could know and possibly care about, but never again a primary influence. Alexander nodded without hesitation. "I'll accept any terms that allow me to know them and for them to know they have a father who loves them, even if I can't be the father they deserve." Diana reached into her purse again and produced a thick document. "These are the conditions our legal team has prepared. If you agree to everything outlined here, Dr. Chen will begin preparing Ruby and Rose for video contact. The first session would take place in 6 months, assuming your continued cooperation with federal authorities and completion of additional counseling requirements." As Alexander reviewed the document, he understood that Diana was offering him something unprecedented, a chance to rebuild a relationship with his daughters based entirely on their needs and emotional health rather than his own desires or parental rights. The conditions were strict, the oversight comprehensive, and his role would be permanently limited, but it represented the possibility of being part of Ruby and Rose's lives rather than remaining a painful memory they would eventually prefer to forget. "There's one more thing," Diana said as Alexander signed each page of the agreement. "The girls don't know about the financial aspects of what you did or the full scope of your criminal activities. As far as they understand, Papa made mistakes that hurt people and had to go away to learn how to be better. When they're older, they'll learn the complete truth, but for now, they're protected from details that would only cause them pain without providing any benefit. Alexander felt a wave of gratitude toward the woman he had betrayed so completely. Even now, even after everything he had done to destroy their family, Diana was protecting his daughters from unnecessary trauma while still holding him accountable for his actions. "Thank you," he said, meaning it more deeply than any words he had ever spoken. "For protecting them. For giving them a good life. For allowing me this chance to try to be worthy of being their father again." Diana stood to leave, gathering her documents with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to controlling complex situations. "Don't thank me yet, Alexander. Prove that you deserve their love by being someone they can be proud of knowing. Not the successful venture capitalist you used to be, but a genuinely good man who prioritizes their happiness over his own comfort." As Diana walked away, Alexander understood that he had been given something most men in his situation never received, a path toward redemption that began with accepting permanent consequences for his choices while still allowing him to love his daughters in whatever limited way their well-being would permit. It wasn't the second chance he had fantasized about during his darkest prison nights, but it was infinitely better than the complete loss he had feared was permanent. For the first time since his arrest, Alexander felt something approaching hope. 2 years after that pivotal meeting in the Federal Detention Center, Alexander Hartwell stood in the arrivals area of Denver International Airport, wearing clothes that had come from a prison commissary catalog rather than the designer boutiques that had once defined his wardrobe. At 39, he looked older than his years, the consequence of 5 years in federal prison, intensive therapy, and the kind of soul-deep reckoning that transforms a person's understanding of everything they thought they knew about themselves. The supervised visit had been arranged through Dr. Sarah Chen, the child psychologist who had been working with Ruby and Rose for over a year to prepare them for this moment. Video calls had progressed to phone conversations, and finally to this carefully orchestrated face-to-face meeting in a neutral location where everyone could feel safe while assessing whether Alexander had genuinely transformed into someone worthy of knowing his daughters. Diana met him at the baggage claim, and Alexander was struck again by how completely she had evolved from the woman he had married. At 34, she radiated confidence and purpose that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with the security that came from building a life based on her own values rather than someone else's expectations. "Alexander," she said with professional courtesy. "The girls are excited but nervous. Dr. Chen will be present throughout the visit, and we'll be staying in a public space where everyone feels comfortable." "I understand," Alexander replied, meaning it completely. "Diana, I want you to know that I'm not here to disrupt the life you've built for them. I'm here because they expressed interest in knowing their father, and I'll follow whatever boundaries keep them feeling safe." They drove through the Colorado mountains in Diana's Range Rover, past snow-covered peaks that reminded Alexander of Christmas cards from his childhood, when holidays meant family gatherings rather than romantic escapes with women who abandoned him the moment his money disappeared. The landscape was breathtaking, and he could understand why Diana had chosen this place to build their new life, somewhere clean and beautiful, far removed from the toxic environment his choices had created in California. The meeting took place at a family recreation center in downtown Denver, a neutral location where children played while parents supervised from comfortable seating areas. Dr. Chen, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the gentle authority that came from decades of helping families navigate complex emotional terrain, greeted Alexander with professional warmth. "Mr. Hartwell, Ruby and Rose have been looking forward to this meeting, but they're also processing complex emotions about seeing you after so many years. We'll take everything at their pace and follow their comfort level." When his daughters appeared, Alexander felt his breath catch in his throat. They were 7 years old now, no longer the toddlers he remembered but genuine little people with distinct personalities and confident expressions that spoke of children who felt completely secure in their world. Ruby had grown tall and serious, with Diana's analytical eyes but Alexander's determined jawline. Rose remained smaller and more playful, but both girls carried themselves with the poise of children who had never doubted they were loved unconditionally. "Papa," Ruby said tentatively, studying his face as if comparing it to photographs or memories she wasn't entirely sure she trusted. "Hi, sweetheart," Alexander said, kneeling down so he was at their eye level. "You've grown so much. You're both so beautiful and so big. Rose stepped closer, her natural curiosity overcoming her initial shyness. Mama said you've been working very hard to become a better person. Are you all better now? The question, asked with 7-year-old directness, cut straight to the heart of everything Alexander had spent 5 years trying to understand about himself and his capacity for change. I'm much better, Rose, he said carefully. I learned a lot about making good choices and being honest and putting the people I love before my own wants. I'm still learning every day, but I'm definitely better than I was before. They spent 2 hours together in that public space, playing simple games and talking about the girls' interests and adventures. Ruby had discovered a passion for mathematics and was already reading at a 5th grade level. Rose had fallen in love with skiing and horseback riding and could name every species of bird that lived around their mountain home. Both girls spoke fluent Spanish, something Diana had apparently prioritized in their education, and had traveled extensively throughout Europe and South America, experiencing cultures and perspectives Alexander had never thought to provide them. Most remarkably, they seemed completely untroubled by trauma or anxiety related to his absence. Diana had clearly succeeded in protecting them from the psychological damage that could have resulted from watching their father choose criminal behavior over family stability. Do you live in a house now, Papa? Rose asked during one of their conversations. I live in a small apartment in a city called San Francisco, Alexander replied honestly. It's not as nice as your mountain house, but it's clean and safe, and I'm working at a job where I help other people learn about making good financial decisions. This was true, though simplified for their understanding. Alexander's parole conditions required him to work for a non-profit organization that provided financial literacy education to low-income families. The work paid a fraction of what he had once earned, but it was genuine employment that contributed positively to society rather than exploiting it for personal gain. Maybe someday we can visit your apartment, Ruby said thoughtfully. If Mama thinks it's okay and if you keep being good. As the visit concluded, Dr. Chen pulled Alexander aside for a brief evaluation. Mr. Hartwell, the girls responded very positively to you today. They seem comfortable and curious rather than fearful or conflicted. Diana and I will discuss whether to schedule another visit in a few months. Walking back to Diana's car, Alexander felt overwhelmed by gratitude for what he'd been given and clear-eyed about what he'd lost forever. Ruby and Rose would never again be his children in any primary sense. Diana was their mother, protector, and primary influence, and they were thriving under her care in ways that suggested they had never really needed him for their emotional security. But they had seemed genuinely happy to know him, curious about their biological father, and open to the possibility of having him as a limited but positive presence in their lives. Diana, he said as they reached her car, I know this doesn't change anything about what I did or the damage I caused. But thank you for giving me the chance to know them. They're incredible, and that's entirely because of how you've raised them. Diana studied his face for a long moment, perhaps assessing whether his gratitude was genuine or another manipulation designed to serve his own emotional needs. Alexander, the only reason this visit happened is because Ruby and Rose expressed interest in knowing their father. If you continue being someone they can respect and trust, these visits will continue. If you ever disappoint them or cause them pain, they'll stop immediately and permanently. I understand, Alexander said. I won't let them down. As he flew back to San Francisco that evening, Alexander understood that his story had been fundamentally rewritten. He would never again be a wealthy venture capitalist or a man whose success impressed others. He would never regain the social status, financial power, or professional influence that had once defined his identity. But he might, if he continued the difficult work of becoming genuinely worthy of their love, be someone his daughters could know without shame, someone they could introduce to their friends without embarrassment, someone who added positive value to their lives rather than requiring them to make excuses for his behavior. It wasn't the second chance he had fantasized about during his darkest moments in federal prison, but it was infinitely better than the complete loss he had once thought was permanent. For the first time since that Christmas Eve when his criminal choices had finally caught up with him, Alexander Hartwell felt something approaching peace. Not the peace that came from getting what he wanted, but the deeper satisfaction that came from accepting what he deserved while working to become someone worthy of more. Outside the airplane window, the Rocky Mountains disappeared into darkness, and Alexander understood that his daughters were down there somewhere, safe and loved, and building the kind of childhood memories that would sustain them throughout their lives. They would build those memories with or without him, but if he continued growing into the man they deserved to know, he might be fortunate enough to witness some of their joy. That possibility, earned through genuine change rather than demanded as a right, felt like the most valuable thing he had ever possessed. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.